Hello, Tom Levecchia here with the New Theory podcast. And if you haven't heard already, and I want to point to you, because if you're listening to this, either you're a friend of the guest, friend of me, or into podcasting, and regardless of where you fall on the spectrum, podcasting is huge right now. And the first of what I like to believe, the first and probably the biggest network out there is Wondery. Wondery was started by a gentleman named Anon Lopez, who was on the podcast, who's phenomenal. And my favorite podcast that I listen to on that particular network is Business Wars with David Bush. He was also on the podcast here for New Theory, and we're big fans of Wondery. They're doing some really cool and amazing stuff. Audio is going to usurp, if it hasn't already, on video streams in terms of content, not just music. And Wondery is in the right place at the right time to make this happen. But you need the great content to make it click. Now, we have the Chief Content Officer, Marshall Louis, who is going to talk about the newest series on Wondery, which is the Imagine Life. And I want you to think of it as what's your line? For those that remember what's your line, each episode puts you in the shoes of a celebrity before they were famous, which is interesting. But here's a twist. They don't tell you the celebrity whose life you're experiencing until the very end of the episode. So you're literally out on the edge of your feet. Marshall, welcome to the New Theory podcast. How are you doing today?
Hey, Tom. I'm good. How are you?
I'm well, thanks. I'm well. All right, so let's jump right in. So first, give us your background as Marshall, and then we'll jump into the show. But I want to learn a little bit about who you are and what makes you tick.
Sure. So my name is Marshall Louis. I'm the Chief Content Officer here at Wondery. And my background is in film and television. I was a screenwriter and director for many years, made a couple of films. And then about 5 years ago, I started at a company called Adaptive Studios, and we were a multi-platform production company. So I got used to doing not just film and TV, but also we started a publishing division. We had a digital division. So we made books and graphic novels and digital series and some podcasts, and got kind of the taste of what it was like to tell stories really across all these different platforms that in some cases require a lot less people and a lot fewer people and a lot less money than making a movie or a television show it does to get off the ground. Correct.
But here's the thing. Now Wondery, I believe, and you probably agree, is a great medium, and it's, as I understand, it's doing fairly well. I listen to most of your podcasts, and I hear advertisers, so that's usually a good sign. However, though, 2 years ago, even a year ago, it was kind of a leap to jump into a podcasting network. So how did you, as Marshall, leave a setting that you knew that you were comfortable with to kind of go, into the wilderness?
I think it's more like the Wild West than the wilderness. And so there's a lot of excitement and opportunity. Yeah. But creatively, and you could have a whole conversation about the exciting changes on the business side of the podcasting and the audio space. But for me, it was creatively a couple of things. One is I just was falling in love with podcasts. I've been listening to them since they first started coming out, 10 years ago or whatever it was. And more, I found myself not talking about this or that movie that I was excited about, but like I was that annoying guy who was being like, I just heard this on a podcast, or, I just started listening to this, this series. It's amazing. And I was one of those people sitting, in my car longer after I'd arrived at my destination, getting emotional about a podcast, about an episode of a show. So when I was thinking about, where my passion was, I guess it has just sort of shifted from where it was like when I went to film school way back when, which was before podcasts even existed.
Nice. So that's exciting. So I think I definitely buy into that, the Marshall creative, especially the Chief Content Officer, that your creativity shines through, and you have some really great podcasts on there. But then how do you reconcile, or how do you deal with, hey, you were at a big studio where you had, tons of designers and tons of producers and tons of resources, where although I assume Hanan probably has the right resources, probably much less than what you're accustomed to. So how do you go from having creative to making the vision with, much less resources as a startup like Wondery?
That's a good question. Well, Adaptive Studios was a startup, and even though we produce stuff for HBO and Netflix and other places, like we were a startup, and my background's in independent film,
Okay.
which is so I've always been really comfortable trying to make something with like on a bare bones. That's more what I'm used to, and I think Wondery is interesting in the space because Hernan comes from television. He ran Fox International. um, we're based here in LA versus a lot of the companies that are based in New York. So I think we have a little bit of that Hollywood, DNA, or that film and television DNA in the way that we tell the stories and the way that we, I guess just the way that we tell stories, and that kind of comes through.
Nice, nice. Was Imagine Life, your idea, a team effort? Walk us through that.
Imagine Life was Hernan's idea. We have Wondery has made a bunch of shows that use these kind of immersive scenes, and there's one in particular, American History Tellers, that actually opens every episode with a scene where you imagine that you are in the shoes of someone at a particular historical moment. There's another show called Tides of History that uses the same device, and we use sound design and the way that it's written to say not just prohibition happened in 1920 whatever. It's imagine you are a saloon keeper, or you are an immigrant coming on the ship from to Ellis Island, and it's a really powerful device to use in audio, and it's not a very common one outside of our network. So I think this kind of came from an idea of a show that could be enjoyed by everyone, even kids with their parents, where the entire thing is an immersive experience where you are in the shoes of somebody through their entire life, and it's not until the end that you find out that the person you're in the shoes of, who it is. So there's clues, and some people will listen to these episodes and know very early, and some will know in the last 5 minutes. But either way, we're trying to make it so it kind of works on two levels. Even if you know who the person is, you can enjoy it because it's an experience, and there's still a lot you probably didn't know about that person. And it's an emotional experience, but it's also kind of a fun guessing game to try to figure out if you can put together, who I know it's a musician, but who, is it a who is it, and I think it's a fun game that way.
I love that. And as a marketer myself, experiential marketing is where it's at, whether it be from, augmented reality, virtual reality, sensory, smell, anything where people can be in the movie, rather than watch it, or listen to, be in the show rather than listen to it. So I like what you guys are doing there. How many episodes are released as of now?
We have 3 out now. The show launched a few weeks ago with 2 episodes. And sorry, are you hearing that beat? That I'm getting.
Yeah, it's fine, it's fine. We're very rustic, straightforward podcast, so we get
okay. Sorry about that.
Stuff so it's fine.
I'll take it back though. We have 3 episodes right now that are out. The show launched a couple of weeks ago and hit #1 in Apple Podcasts with 2 episodes, and then there was a 3rd episode that came out last week, and then we're coming out every Sunday afternoon. There's a new episode, so we have our 4th will come out this upcoming Sunday.
Now, would you say that Wondery kind of has a decent ecosystem where Wondery releases something and then those in the Wondery ecosystem jump on it? Or are these typically fans of this genre who find Imagine Life outside of the Wondery family?
I think it's a little bit of both. There's nothing quite like this show that we have in our network. So we have a good amount of true crime, we have history, we have business, we have a bunch of different genres, but this is probably the most general audience show that we've put out. And we are, of course, promoting it to the other shows on our network, but people are also finding it separate from that. And of course, word of mouth is the most important thing. So if people like the show, that they're telling other people about it is the most important way that the word gets out.
Well, I was going to say, because, you as, again, you're creative by nature, right? So this probably is exciting for you to roll out something different in the genre. But how about as a chief content officer, right? Your job is to say, hey, let's create out great content that's congruent to our brand and what we're doing. And you guys have been really killing it in terms of like the real life, businessy, professional stuff. Not that I'm saying this isn't great. This is probably your best show because I love the concept, but it does divert from your content strategy. So as a chief content officer at first blush, were you on board and the creative kicked in, or were you at first to scratch your head saying, I have to think about this a little bit?
No, I think we want to be in as many verticals as possible. We don't want to just sit in the verticals where we already have established shows.
Got it.
So that part wasn't disconcerting. I mean, it is a very different kind of idea. So we wanted to make sure it was as good as it could possibly be out of the gate. So we just worked really hard on making it as strong a show as we could.
Love it. What's the best thing about podcasting space versus traditional media as the CCO?
For me, it brings together a lot of the best. Well, I'd say two things. For me, it brings together a lot of the best of digital media. So if you look like at previously, I'd worked with YouTubers and people in the social media space, and they have a great connection with their audience. But a lot of the time, the content itself is not really long form storytelling. It's short videos of vlogging or something like that. So with podcasting, you get to tell really smart, in-depth stories that go deeper into people's characters and stories, and listeners feel so connected to the stories when they get immersed in a podcast. And I don't think anything else out there like it right now, except maybe, obviously reading a good book or binge watching a television show, but it has that same quality. And the second thing is that I do really enjoy how relatively few people it takes to put together a podcast. It's a lot more streamlined. You don't need 100 people to make a podcast, which is great. And then it can get out into the world where it's most of the time it's free and ad supported for anybody who wants to listen.
Love it. What's your biggest challenge in this space?
I think right now there are so many great things to listen to and so many podcasts. So that's the biggest challenge is, rising above the clutter to, and just, I know as a listener, I just don't have enough time to listen to all the shows that everybody's recommending. And that's just, that's in content in general, we're just overloaded, right? It's the same thing in TV. People say, oh, you should watch that show. And you're like, I have 10 other shows I need to get through before I can get to that one. So podcasting is kind of in the same boat right now.
Now following you, judging by your career and your experiences, and you're I kind of like you downplay a little bit, but you have a pretty strong career. And for Wondery to get somebody like you is not a layup. Like, are you like people centric? Where would you have came over to Wondery, kind of because of great guys like David and Hernan and really high caliber people, or was it more the space, like Wild West? Hey, I'm going to go over to the podcasting space, but more agnostic where you land. Like, what was the pivot point to come over to Wondery in your career progression?
It was a little bit of both. I wasn't necessarily looking to join a company when this opportunity came around, but I did really was really impressed by Hernan and what he was able to do in such a short amount of time. And it felt like Wondery was doing something really interesting in this space, and it was a space I was interested in. So it kind of made sense, but it didn't take a lot of thought either. Once the opportunity arose, I realized, I was like, yeah, let's give it a shot.
Love it. And what question didn't I ask about Imagine Life that you wish I did?
It's a good question. Well, I'd love to talk about the hosts because they're really great.
Hey, who's hosting? I should have asked that.
Yeah. So it's host. We actually, it's our first show. We have alternating hosts.
Oh, wow.
On each episode. So we have one male host and one female host, and depending on who the biography is, who the famous person is, it kind of determines who is going to read it and host. The female host is Virginia Madsen, who was nominated for an Oscar for Sideways,
Nice.
And the male host is Robbie Damon, who does a ton of animated voiceover work and audiobooks and other stuff. And they're both just really strong. They're doing all the different dialogue and voices. If you're not familiar with our single voice style shows, like Tom mentioned, Business Wars, where David Brown does all the voices and the narration, that's the same style that Imagined Life uses. So we have one voice, but they are performing the entire thing, and both sides of the dialogue when we do immersive scenes, and we use sound design to kind of bring you in to the shows. So you really, it's a different kind of storytelling, but you really feel like you're there on the journey between the sound design and the performance. And that's what kind of carries you through.
I love it, and guys, I cannot say enough about the folks over at Wondery. Like I said, I had second. We had the CCO on today. We had the CEO on. We had some of the talent on, and whatever they produce is going to be good. But this particular genre or this particular show, Imagine Life, seems even better. So how can we find it?
Wherever you listen to podcasts, it's available.
iTunes and so forth. And I'll put some links either to the website or to Imagine Life. And Marshall, if you want to be found, how can we find you?
I am not a huge social media person. I am on Twitter at Marshall Louis, LinkedIn. Those are probably the best places to find me, I guess. Or at Wondery.
It's funny because the reason why I wanted you on was because David always mentions your voice in the credits, and like you're kind of, I kind of knew you were behind the scenes kind of guy, but I wanted you on anyway because I respect what you're doing. So Marshall, thank you for being on the New Theory podcast.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Our pleasure.